All right, just in now, President Trump says he will hold a press conference tonight with representatives from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to talk about the coronavirus. This comes as the CDC is calling on Americans to prepare themselves for the eventual spread of the disease in the United States. But some lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are also criticizing the Trump administration's response to the outbreak. Nancy Cordes reports from Capitol Hill.
The coronavirus, which is very well under control in our country.
Even as the White House downplayed the disease,
we have tightly contained this.
CDC officials warned an outbreak could be inevitable.
Now, it's not so much a question of if this will happen anymore, but rather more a question of exactly when this will happen.
They don't have a plan.
Lawmakers from both sides challenged the White House Tuesday on its $2.5 billion budget for fighting coronavirus.
If you lowball something like this, you'll pay for it later.
You're the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yes, sir.
And you can't tell me if we have enough respirators.
And its plan for stockpiling supplies.
We have enough face masks.
We, for the Department of Homeland Security, we do.
I'm not asking for the Department of Homeland Security.
Are you looking?
I'm asking for the American people.
For the entire American public?
Yes.
No, I would say probably not.
Other countries have struggled to curb the virus. Italy now reporting more than 350 cases. South Korea has reported nearly 1,300. In Iran, the deputy health minister himself has contracted the virus, and the country has the highest death toll outside of China.
It seems to be getting worse, not better.
President Trump predicted that a vaccine is right around the corner. Health officials disagreed.
When you're talking about the availability of a vaccine, even to scale it up, you're talking about a year to a year and a half.
Those mixed messages causing some confusion on Capitol Hill.
The public's getting a very different message from the White House, which is saying this is all but contained.
Well, I can't comment on what the White House has been saying on this because the people who work for the White House are not saying that.
All right, Nancy Cordes is joining us now from the Hill. So, Nancy, as you know, the president has announced he'll be holding a press conference tonight regarding the coronavirus. Are you hearing anything from your sources on the Hill about how lawmakers are reacting to this announcement and what they expect the president to say?
Yes, I would say that there was widespread surprise, concern yesterday here on Capitol Hill as they went through a series of briefings and hearings with top administration officials and got a slightly different story from each of these officials about the administration's response to coronavirus. So Republicans have told us they do think that the White House needs to clear some of this up, and Democrats argue that it is further evidence that there is not a hard and fast plan at the White House and that you are seeing the impact of the elimination of some positions over the past few years held by people who were skilled at reacting to and handling pandemics like this one could turn out to be. Beyond that, new this morning, we're hearing from Senator Chuck Schumer, the lead Democrat in the Senate, that he is going to be introducing a request today for $8.5 billion in funding to help combat the coronavirus here in the U.S. compared to the $2.5 billion that the White House requested earlier this week. So that is a big increase in the amount of funding that Democrats are now saying should be used to tackle this disease. And beyond that, they argue that this should all be new funding. And they argue that the White House is trying to rob Peter to pay Paul by taking some of the money that it would like to use from other medical sources like Ebola preparations or NIH research. They say that that's not the way to go. They want this to be $8.5 billion in new funding, and even some Republicans have questioned whether the $2.5 that the White House is requesting is going to be enough. They say don't lowball this. You don't know how much money you're going to need.
Nancy, the president will be appearing at tonight's press conference with representatives from the CDC, but the president is also accusing the media of spooking the markets, of causing the markets to panic. But in fact, it's the CDC's own warnings about the coronavirus and the the fact that you've got hotels and air travel that's been disrupted and manufacturing that's been disrupted, not just across China, but across Asia and now in some other countries as well. And so I wonder what we can expect to hear from the president, if the message from the White House will, I guess, dovetail with the message of the CDC and what lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are saying that they're concerned about.
There does seem to be some dispute over the semantics here. You've got the president's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, saying that this is contained, that coronavirus is contained here in the U.S. You had the Secretary of Health and Human Services make that same claim. That raised some eyebrows here on Capitol Hill from lawmakers who said, well, you can't really say that this virus is contained. Sure, we haven't seen a big increase in the numbers of people who have been diagnosed over the past couple of weeks, but when the number of people who have been sickened all around the world is growing, that gives you an indication that one of those individuals who has the disease but doesn't know it could come to the U.S. at any time from Italy or anywhere else, from China, and that those numbers here in the U.S. could quickly rise. So Republicans we spoke to were a little bit worried about this language that was being used, saying that the disease has been contained here, because if that changes, they worry that that could reflect poorly on the president and the White House. On the other hand, the president is someone who pays very close attention to the stock market and perhaps was troubled by two big drops in 2 consecutive days. And there clearly is a concern, not just at the White House, but here on Capitol Hill, that you don't want to alarm Americans. You don't want them to panic. And certainly, if it's possible to prevent a recession, you don't want to do anything that is going to court one. But clearly, the president himself was concerned, has been watching the markets, tweeted about it again today. So it's clearly on his mind as he makes these public remarks, and that may have been part of the reason that he decided to take things into his own hands, messaging-wise, and decide to give a press conference later today.
Right. I mean, it's one thing to there are 2 risks here, right? One is the health risk to people, and specifically here in the United States, but then there's also the economic risk. And as Reuters is reporting right now, major economies in Asia are expected to either slow down significantly or shrink in the first quarter. And so that is, you can say that it's contained in the United States and less than 60 people have become infected with it, but that doesn't mean that people in Asia are getting any better just because it's not affecting us here physically, and that means the markets will continue to suffer the consequences of that shrinking, the shrinking economic outlook. So I guess those are the things we'll expect to hear from the president when he speaks tonight. But I want to ask you about another topic, switch topics here, to ask you about a new article that you wrote for CBSNews.com. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is asking the Justice Department to investigate acting DNI Richard Grenell. Why does he want them to look into Mr. Grenell?
He wants the Department of Justice to look into foreign lobbying work that Grenell did for a Moldovan oligarch who is now a fugitive, has been accused of corruption, and also the Hungarian government before Grenell was tapped to be the ambassador to Germany back in 2016-2017. Democrats say that if all the reports out there are true by the Washington Post and ProPublica and others, then Grenell should have registered himself under FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is a law that requires individuals to disclose their lobbying for foreign entities. And so essentially what Schumer is doing here is kind of escalating this controversy over the president tapping Grenell now to be the nation's top intelligence officer, if you will, the acting director of national intelligence. It was a surprising choice for both Democrats and Republicans, who thought that he didn't have that much intelligence experience, although many Republicans have been reluctant to voice some of their concerns publicly. But Democrats certainly haven't held back. And now Schumer is escalating things by sending this letter to DOJ, essentially saying that if these reports regarding the nature of Grenell's work are accurate, he may be subject to potential civil criminal liability as well as vulnerable to blackmail in his new position. So Schumer asking the Department of Justice to investigate and we're awaiting word from DOJ about whether they intend to do that.
You know, it's interesting, Nancy. In your article, you mentioned that this Moldovan politician that Mr. Grinnell wrote articles for was barred by the U.S. State Department from entering the United States last month because of his involvement in significant corruption. But what's also interesting in your reporting is that Mr. Grinnell was asked about this when he was being nominated to his post in Berlin by Ben Cardin.
Right. During his confirmation hearing, Cardin asked him, did he get paid for writing these op-ed pieces that were so complimentary of this Moldovan oligarch? And Grinnell said no, he had not been paid, that he just wrote these articles because that's what he believed, and he believes in democracy, and he felt motivated to write these things. So if the reports are true that actually he was paid, Democrats say in this new letter that it's an indication that he lied to Congress, which they believe is another strike against him as he begins this new job as the temporary head of ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. You know, and while he is temporary, he is still entitled to remain in that position for some 210 days. Democrats don't believe that that's appropriate. They don't think he's the right person for that job. Whether they will succeed in convincing the president of this administration's Justice Department to investigate him, though, is another question. That would be certainly a very unusual situation if you had DOJ investigating the acting director of national intelligence.
Oh, yeah. And remind me, Nancy, Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chairman, what did he do with regards to the Foreign Agents Registration Act?
Right. You know, it's very similar. He and others around him had not registered as foreign agents, so he didn't register the work that he was doing on behalf of Ukrainian politicians, and that is part of what he eventually was charged with. Now, it is important to note that FARA has not been pursued by DOJ that much until recently. They just beefed up their FARA operation, so they are really cracking down on individuals who work for foreign governments and then don't disclose it. So, you know, back when Grinnell was doing this work, there were, let's face it, a lot of people who were also doing work on behalf of foreign governments and not reporting it. But what rankles Democrats is that beyond that, he may have been misleading in his Senate testimony, and that because he didn't register with FARA, then when he had to fill out his background check forms, again, in preparation to be confirmed by Congress, he didn't list that foreign work that he did, which they say would have been germane to the position that he was seeking to hold at the time, which was ambassador to Germany.
All right, Nancy Cordes, excellent reporting as always, Nancy. We thank you very much.
You're welcome.